Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this working group. We have a little bit of change of plans on the way, which I think is good. It shows how dynamic the situation is. I will give a little review about what the working group is up to. Then I would like very much Joe Ackerman to make a couple of comments, if that is okay with you. And at 5:30, Laurence is going to meet and join us. And maybe, without being cynical, as we're not going to change the monetary system in a short period of time anyhow, maybe we spend half an hour at the end of the session to talk about Greece and what it actually means, and maybe whether we can come to some sort of supporting message from this working group that goes along the lines business leaders are supporting governments in now continuing with the rescue plans and the European initiative. I think that would be probably a very welcome message coming from the side. But let's discuss that in a minute. Now, it has been a big pleasure to chair the working group on international monetary system, and I would like to thank my colleagues for the cooperation and their contribution. Let me just very briefly introduce the topic, at least for those of us who are not financial experts. The international monetary system is not really a system in the sense of planned and organized framework, as it lacks, for instance, a mechanism of automatic corrections of imbalances. Today's so-called system is actually more or less a outcome of interaction between independent policy decisions of individual countries and market forces. And as a result, the market is divided into major currencies that float freely and permit the free flow of capital, and another camp with varying degrees of control over exchange rates and cross-border capital flows. But remarkably, system or not, it has worked. The globalization process over the past 20 years was provided with liquidity, and the monetary developments were conducive to growth, employment, and international trade. But the financial crisis has exposed weaknesses of the system, and there are a number of related reasons why there's a need to reform the present monetary order, and I would like to highlight just 4 of them. First of all, the dollar standard does not reflect the historic shift in relative economic weights in the world economy with the growing importance of emerging markets. Secondly, we have witnessed persistent global current account imbalances which helped stoke the crisis. And thirdly, currency markets experienced volatility and persistent misalignments, which are impediments for international investment and trade. So the aim must be to have flexible but not excessively volatile exchange rates. Fourthly, large and volatile short-term cross-border capital inflows can create financial bubbles and overvaluation of currencies that lead to financial crisis when capital flows are suddenly cut off. So there are really compelling reasons to address the current monetary order, as our working group did. First, I think there's a very broad consensus that the most important precondition for achieving a stable international monetary system are stable economic policies in the major countries and a more effective policy coordination on the G20 level. But the working group of the B20 also makes some more specific proposals around 3 topics, namely exchange rate volatility, stronger macroeconomic coordination, and a multipolar currency system. With regards to exchange rate volatility, we propose to limit the impact of exchange rate volatility on trade and direct investment by ensuring that new regulations do not hinder the use of hedging instruments for the industry. by gradually enlarging the basket of special drawing rights and by supporting the development of national, meaning private local currency bond markets in emerging countries. Now, that's the second point, on macroeconomic coordination, we propose to strengthen the International Monetary Fund in its role of providing technical support to foster macroeconomic coordination and enhancing financial stability in cooperation with the FSB. And therefore, I think that is what's really meant, addressing the abuse of artificial currency fluctuation as a means to distort fair trade. On currency, the working group proposes the need for a multipolar normal currency system. As the structure and sources of trade and investment have changed dramatically, a multipolar system would be a better fit with this new reality and would help reduce firms' transaction costs. The system should reflect the three economic regions, Asia, Europe, and North America, with more or less equal weight in the global economy. Trade between and within these blocks is no longer US-centric, but still largely denominated in US dollar, creating additional exchange rate risks or hedging costs. Now, when we talk about a multipolar system, one of course may ask whether the Chinese yuan and the euro are really up to the task, but this is a question that gives me a very nice opportunity to pass over to Joe Ackerman.
Well, thank you, Michael. Actually, I don't know what I have to do now because, unfortunately, or fortunately, we have 7 working groups. Michael chaired one, which was in a different organization. I chaired the working group of the World Economic Forum. The good thing is, the results of our considerations are more or less the same. So I can echo very much what he said, which I don't want to do because I think we have other topics to discuss. Let me just add 2 points which maybe, in addition to what has been already said, played a certain role in our paper, namely the capital controls, which, as we all know, from an economic purist point of view, is something we don't like. But we came clearly to the conclusion that free capital flows across borders continue to remain a desirable objective. This holds true for short-term capital flows as much as for long-term capital flows in the shape of FDIs, where ownership restrictions are still prevalent in many countries. At the same time, and that was after long debates, we acknowledge that capital controls, especially on capital inflows, can be justified at times, especially in economies where domestic financial markets are underdeveloped and too small to absorb large capital inflows. Ongoing efforts to develop local financial markets are therefore sensible and welcome. As I said this morning at the meeting with President Sarkozy, I just had the honor of spending a day with President Medvedev in Moscow, talking about setting up a financial center in Moscow. And I think that helps to create this kind of financial market which can absorb capital inflows better and, of course, also retain capital outflows. Until that objective has been achieved, capital controls may serve as an interim instrument. However, given their distortive effects, these must be subject to strict limitations and monitoring by the IMF. A disruptive capital flows can often be traced to wrong macroeconomic policies. The availability of alternatives, especially macroprudential policies, should always be considered. Then we have added a third point after long discussions, which I think is probably the most challenging one, and a very controversial one, but one which started and provoked my thinking, at least, at the end of the first half of August of this year, when suddenly the equity markets collapsed around the globe. And the GDP growth in the models being factored in at that time was about 2.5%. So actually a global recession. whereas the IMF and most economists were still talking about 3.5 to 4%. So is the market right, or do we see exaggerations based on a lack of functioning markets which led to dramatic herd behavior? And that's why we felt that we should talk about improving the functionality of financial markets. The stability of the international monetary system is inseparable from stability in financial markets in general. The instability in financial markets has cost 30 to 50 million jobs in the last few years. So that shows that there is a tremendous link between growth, employment, and financial market stability. Market developments over recent years have underlined that financial markets are prone to exaggerations and herd behavior, which can cause asset prices to deviate from levels justified by fundamentals. And I just discussed with my Italian friend before, and I think the best proof in the last few days. We are vulnerable to the perception of systemic risks. So beyond the fundamentals of individual companies, our valuation levels have fluctuated dramatically within almost hours. And if the price to book of most banks on a global basis now is somewhere around 0.5, 0.6, then you must see that this cannot be justified neither by the asset quality, nor by the profitability, nor by the risk exposure. It is a reflection of the perception of being exposed to systemic risk. And I think in that sense, it is a more macro consideration which plays into valuation levels. So in that sense, this makes unsustainable cross-border capital flows and the building up of asset bubbles more likely, which in turn can become an issue for the stability of the international financial system, but then of course also having a big impact on the real economy, as we have seen in the last few years. In my view, there is a need to address market functionalities that lie at the heart of such market imperfections. One example are market structures, such as the prevalence of algorithmic trading that follows market trends. Now, I'm not against that as a banker, of course, but what we have to consider whether there is a procyclicality in the system which leads to exaggerations which are not in the interest of the real economy. In order to avoid market disruptions and excessive movements of asset price and volumes, it would therefore be desirable to strengthen market characteristics that will help to avoid herd behavior and help to ensure that a broad range of investors and investment styles are represented in financial markets. This will help to stabilize investment flows, thereby dampening the volatility of asset price and the likelihood of bubbles. Instruments conducive to that objective include, based on our analysis in the working group, an active use of macroprudential policies to address financial imbalances in early stages of the problem. The stress testing of algorithmic trading platforms, the use of circuit breakers to halt excessive market movements, the encouragement of long-term real money investors, such as pension funds, eschewing regulatory measures that discourage long-term investment, such as some aspects of Solvency II in the insurance industry, or the prohibition of CDS and sovereign debt, which will only discourage investors from investing into long-dated government debt due to a lack of hedging opportunities. Of course, in that context, we are also not strong supporters of the financial transaction tax, because reducing liquidity normally adds to volatility. So it's actually exactly counterproductive to what those who are so strongly promoting it want to achieve. While it may not be immediately obvious, it is true that the international monetary system is an issue of joint interest for the official and the public sector. Private sector actions and attitudes impact on the shape of the international monetary system. Just think of the question which currencies companies choose to settle their trade, in which currency to invest in, and it is equally true that the decisions taken at the level of governments regarding the shape of the international monetary system will directly impact on business. As representatives of the business community, we therefore very much welcome the dialogue and offer our input into these debates. And I was very thankful to President Sarkozy this morning for having taken an hour and a half to discuss with us these issues. And as you can imagine, he was very much involved, sometimes even very emotional about some of these issues. And I think that's what a politician should be. Thank you.
Well, Joe, thank you very much. We do have here with us our friend Robson Braga from Brazil, and maybe would be interesting for the group here to understand, if you listen to what this working group has come up with as proposals, if you listen to what Joe Ackerman has just added, what is your perspective from a country that is in the middle of all these recommendations?
Você vai falar do câmbio ou eu falo depois? Bien, bonjour à tous. Excusez-moi pour mon français. Je vais demander à la traduction simultane pour faire la correction de français pour le français correct. Bon, je viens d'un pays qui a passé por plusieurs difficultés et une expérience très riche d'avoir le FMI comme l'appui du FMI dans le principe de la décade de 80 pour financer le paiement de sa dette externe et pour soumettre tout le programme du Brésil au programme d'ajuste de FMI. On a fait des sacrifices énormes et on a eu des rétractions d'activité et des taux de chômage très élevés. On a déclaré une moratoria de la dette externe au final de l'année 80. Et on a affronté pour plusieurs années des problèmes de crédit et des problèmes de coûts de taux d'intérêt au extérieur. Pendant 20 ans, on a fait des changes profonds de change économique et on a réussi de débeler l'inflation et de faire l'ouverture économique, une réduction des rôles de l'État. Et on a fait le renforcement de l'institution et finalement, on a implanté un régime d'échange fluctuant. Le ex-secrétaire des États-Unis dans l'époque d'appui au Brésil, Larry Summers, on a rencontré ce monsieur-là dans la dernière semaine au Brésil. Il a dit que jamais il pouvait penser qu'en 10 ans, après 10 ans, le Brésil aurait réussi à participer d'un marché international dans meilleures conditions que d'autres pays développés. Cette expérience nous permet d'affirmer que le FMI a toutes les conditions de desempenhar un rôle très important dans la supervision et dans l'appui à la coordination des politiques macroéconomiques du pays. Mais ces politiques et mécanismes doivent être adéquats à la conjoncture économique internationale et à toutes les caractéristiques spécifiques de chaque pays. Et je pense que c'est crucial que tous les pays développés et les pays émergents puissent avoir des politiques économiques responsables pour assurer les problèmes de déséquilibres fiscaux et monétaires de long terme sans compromettre la capacité de récupération économique dans les court délai. Nous pensons qu'une des propositions qui est les FMI, renforcer le rôle des FMI dans ses fonctions de supervision et d'appui à coordination des politiques macroéconomiques et augmenter la transparence dans les marchés financiers et l'appui au développement des marchés financiers efficients. Le FMI doit désempenher toutes les fonctions de gestion de la crise et d'emprunter dans les crises de balance de paiement. C'est nécessaire de renforcer la capacité de financement à travers de la capitalisation du FMI et renforcer la capacité du FMI pour la supervision de l'ajuste fiscal. Expandir la possibilité de SDR, de droit spécial de sac, et d'appuyer, et de faire l'appui à l'identification des chemins pour l'équilibre de l'économie globale. C'est important de permettre d'ampliar le papel du FMI dans la supervision de la stabilité financière en coopération avec le Financial Stability Board. Pour que les FMI peuvent désempenhar cette fonction, c'est fondamental que l'institution ait une bonne acceptation pour parte de tous ses membres. C'est crucial de continuer à ampliar la représentation des pays émergents dans le fonds. Et pour fin, je pense que c'est nécessaire faire une révision du mandat du FMI pour que l'institution puisse assumer tous les problèmes que représentent les propositions qui sont présentées ici. Merci. Excusez-moi pour le français.
Robson, thank you very much. You know, it's, I think, very interesting to hear from somebody who's probably more involved in the problems of currency and exchange rate volatility. And I don't hear anything that is totally detrimental to what we have said. Now, is there anything from my colleagues around the table that you would like to add to this point, something that we've forgotten or something that you would like to discuss? If that is not the case, then I would ask Louis to do the wrap-up on this part, and then we'll go into a free part on our burning topic.
It's difficult to summarize what has been said, but I could say that we entrepreneurs and other actors of the real economy, we think that the solution of present crisis lays in a stable and long-term growth. Any reform of the international monetary system must focus on that target, favoring growth and stability, in particular, stability of exchange rates, and I am ready to adopt your formula, Mr. Chairman. Flexible, but not too much. My colleagues, you explained extensively how much responsibility of such a task are evenly spread over us, the actors of the economy, the states, the international organizations, such as the IMF, and the regulator, making the emergence of a new governance at the world level very challenging. But it's only thanks to a stronger cooperation between all these stakeholders and also stronger discipline for governments that we will be in a position to implement the recommendation we propose. And you have summarized some of them. Certainly, to allow companies to protect themselves against the volatility of the exchange rate through hedging. And you know that if we don't take care, Basel III could impose us to have collaterals in front of our hedging positions. And I think this could be worse than the issue we want to address. We are absolutely unable to bring collaterals at that level. My company, for example, has a hedging portfolio of $70 billion US. It means that it's not affordable for us to have any collateral at that level. You mentioned also the setting up of a multipolar currency system. And Mr. Braga de Andrade, you were insisting on the use which could be done of the DGS as a tool for a multi-currency based international monetary system. And also the institution of a global monitoring to prevent new crises and imbalance, and also to check disciplines, how disciplines are respected by governments. We know that it's a problem in Europe. We all have to speak and exchange between us in order to take into consideration everybody's constraint and to find acceptable and profitable solution. The B20 is a perfect audience for that purpose, and we would like also to take these opportunities to warmly thank the people who organized this meeting and made it possible and efficient. Thank you.
Louis, thank you very much. I mean, I've read the papers for the G20 action plan. It addresses all the same points, maybe a little bit from a different perspective. But I was positively surprised, really, about how business and policymakers see these points. Now, maybe I'll do a introduction in my thinking about what has happened over the last couple of days in Greece, and I've mentioned that in the CEO Roundtable, but maybe as a warm-up, I'll just repeat a couple of thoughts. Now, as surprising as the announcement of a referendum was, I think it's a perfect, let's say, symbolic act to preserve political power, which I think is exactly why a lot of people are not happy with politicians these days anymore. Now, does that sort of jeopardize the European story as a whole? My thesis is not. What we need now is the three other points that the European Pact has addressed. And I think foremost we talk about Italy and stabilization of the political system and the budget issues. Now that works in hand with the banking recapitalization. I'm not happy with the way how that is done. I think there would have been other ways to do it, but that's what it is. And then the third part of the package which is the ESFS. Now, I've talked about the mixed reception of this bond insurance mechanism, but I think it's again from the investor side a totally legitimate concern that now in the implementation, they don't know the technical details, and that was exactly the last time in June with the first rescue package, the same thing. We announce a good plan that sounds good on the surface, but the real details are missing. So there is a lot of pressure now to put this in place. Now, I think the strong message to Italy doesn't work without the two other points, because we've seen the last bond issue was really again at levels above 6. I think everybody knows the real problem in Italy is that if the refinancing costs are going up above 6, it will not be possible going forward. So we'll need market levels of around 5%. So we'll need this mechanism of the ESFS to reduce refinancing costs for Italy. Yeah, but again, it will only work if the Italians put their plans in place and action behind words. So that would be just, my interpretation of the situation. And I would be very interested, Joe, because the first question I got this morning from journalists was the banking world is discussing, now that conditions have changed, we'll go into a renegotiation of the whole private participation on the Greek restructuring. And maybe you can say a couple of words from the IFF.
Well, if you talk to investors in US or Asia and in the Middle East in the last few months, you always heard four things. The first one is you have to restructure the Greek debt because the debt sustainability of the current situation is not given. Secondly, because of the spillover or contagion effects, you need a stronger bazooka-like firewall protection. The third one was those banks which probably cannot take the hit should be recapitalized. But you have, and this is very important and very often not yet mentioned, you have to re-establish the funding market, because as you know, many banks cannot fund themselves long-term, nor in dollar terms or some even in euro terms. And we then offered a compromise which was higher than the original, but we should not quite confuse ourselves. At the end of July, the 21% was up to almost 40% already, just given the interest rates moves in the meantime. So from the 40% to the roughly 50 to 55% net present value loss wasn't that a big step. This would have certainly improved the debt sustainability of Greece, but we would need the credit protection umbrella in parallel, and of course to recapitalize the banks and the funding market. Now, the very dangerous thing is right now that we do have spillover effects already affecting Italy yesterday. And we should not forget that without the intervention in the secondary market by the European Central Bank, the yield level would have been so much higher already. So in that sense, there is already a stabilizing impact, which is somewhat an artificial way of stabilizing the market. We think that we have to push very hard, and I had many discussions yesterday with the Greek government that we continue. And they asked us actually to issue a statement supporting that. Now, given the situation, if it's all delayed, by 6, 9, or I don't know how many months because of the referendum, then we are a little bit where we were at the end of July, where it was deferred for other reasons, also to some extent reasons within our own countries. And of course, we had to renegotiate the whole package. If we have to do that again, prices are just collapsing in the interim. And all what has been achieved in terms of a negotiated deal would be in jeopardy again. I think it's very realistic to assume that we cannot interfere into domestic politics in Greece. But we kept the door open, and we clearly support the deal which was structured a few weeks ago. But let me say something very, in my view, more fundamental. I think we violated a principle which was very, very important, not only to banks, to pension funds, insurance companies, to the financial market in general, namely that sovereign risk is a risk-free asset class. Since Greece and the PSI, the private sector involvement, which we reluctantly agreed to support with the huge resistance of the European Central Bank, and by the way, of many European governments, since then we have opened a Pandora box which is unstoppable. And we will have the same discussion over and over. And I just ask myself how we are going to fund these countries going forward if people factor in some sort of a burden sharing. And that's why I think we are in a completely different financial market environment. And that's certainly not helped by the referendum threat of yesterday, but the Pandora box is already open and makes it so very difficult to come up with satisfactory solutions longer term, unless we get some sort of a next phase of integration, be the fiscal union, be something else, which demonstrates to the world that we are standing fully behind the European ID. I think the situation in Italy and in other countries is alarming. If we have about 236 billion available still under the old stability facility. You can leverage that up, but we need expectations on a global scale are something around 1.5 to 2 trillion euros. And the insurance scheme, which by the way was developed by Allianz and Deutsche Bank, is, I think, a good way going forward. There are some other ideas, but that would give some more protection. But this protection only lasts for about 3 years, knowing the need these countries have to refund themselves and to refinance. So we have to think longer term. What we are still in a crisis management mood, but we now have to move on to something which creates stability longer term. And there's a lot of challenges ahead of us. And unfortunately, because of the referendum yesterday, I think this G20 and B20 is less of a get-together where you can think longer term. We are back in a crisis management mood, and that's probably not so good for the world as a whole.
Thank you very much, Joe. Welcome, Laurence. We've moved from our original topic now to the question of what, have the actual announcements from Greece, what kind of consequence and what will be our reaction. So we'll give, I'm coming to the statement that we would like to give, but maybe, this is a unique opportunity to understand also what is the Italian position. And maybe, Gabriele, we haven't talked about this, but I think everything depends now so much on, is Italy getting the message?
Well, I didn't expect to be asked, such a question, so I'm not really prepared. But and I'm not a politician, so I can really give you, specific answers. No, it is difficult to disagree with what you said. I think that the only thing I could add to what has been expressed by Joe and by you is that today there are two lines, in my opinion, that have to be undertaken, one after the other, or maybe in parallel. One is certainly from the Italian side, action. I think that, there is no other way. I mean, we have to do something in our country. And the only thing I can really add, and probably also Madame Parisot can, add what Emma has certainly said to her, that the constituencies in Italy, the industrial people, the banking institutions, the insurances are all ready to support strong actions from the government. And this is what has been indicated in a letter sent to the President of the Republic and to the Prime Minister yesterday. So I think that it is really a question of, pushing the present government. And Emma went as far as to say either the government takes action or it should leave the place to another government. I mean, it is difficult to ask to the industrial groups and to the banking groups something, stronger than this. And what I said is that the country, in my opinion, is ready to support the consequences of such a development. The other thing, and I agree with what Mr. Ackman said, is that, in my opinion, Europe has to move towards, a better integration, a stronger integration. I mean, we cannot imagine, in my opinion, many other solutions. One is that each country, Italy in particular in this case, does its own job. And the second is that Europe does its own job. I mean, we cannot just keep situations which are fictitious or, artificial for too long a time. So this is my personal opinion in that.
Well, I think it's encouraging to see that we have some individual business leaders in Italy now stepping up and making public announcements, because I think part of the problem really is the psychological effect on population and election behavior. Because those ones who are bringing the message are the ones that are being shot. And I've heard a couple of comments from high places in Italy about, the pressure that is now being put on Italy. That reminds me exactly on the reactions we've seen in Greece. And so I think really it's very important that local people are now taking up the messages instead of just always pointing to Berlin and Paris. Now, the idea here is that, this working group supports what I think very basic message, and I would like to ask Richard Dobbs from McKinsey to give us an idea about, the first draft of this announcement.
So the suggestion here is an announcement ideally led by some member of this group who isn't from the financial sector. This, I think, will be much more powerful, and apologies for people from the financial sector, if this was from someone from the real economy giving this announcement rather than someone from the financial sector.
Excuse me.
An apology. I just think it will be more credible in terms of getting this out there.
I don't agree, excuse me.
Okay.
I think, if I may, Michael, if we decide all together that it's really worth it, that there is a public statement just to support the governments, the heads of governments who will attend a special meeting tonight and tomorrow, of course. I think that we should make this statement on behalf of all B20, not only on this group. And I think it must be a very simple message of support, but on behalf of B20. So what we can do, if you agree, is just after this session, we go into a plenary session. I ask at the mic if anyone is against this idea of a public statement of support. I'm sure that nobody will disagree. And it will make a strong, not precise, but a strong announcement from the B20.
Content.
I'm trying to capture the conversation I've heard, and I think it would be something along the lines of leaders from the business community, leaders from global businesses at the B20 Business Summit held in Cannes, express their support for the European government's plan, possibly for Greece and Italy, possibly just leave that blank and just talk about the European government's plan announced last Thursday, and encourage all governments to move purposefully to define the details and to successfully implement the plan.
Any?
That we shouldn't say B20. I mean, it's just the B20. This is quite different. Because business leaders, it might be considered as some individuals. I mean, this is the B20 as an informal body which express its view.
Right. Any comments on that one?
Okay. Now, can you repeat the statement exactly?
This was a straw man. I haven't, I'm just trying to capture the conversation I've heard. Is the conversation, the statement would be the B20 business summit held in Cannes expressed their support for the European government's plan announced last Thursday and encourage all governments to move purposefully to define the details and to successfully implement the plan.
Support the necessary steps.
I don't think that message carries any urgency. It's sort of stating the obvious. So, I mean, I think I was quite, and I'm not from the financial sector, but with what Mr. Ackerman said about sovereign risk, that Pandora's box, I think this message in some way should carry the urgency of what the situation that we are facing right now.
I may just add, you should maybe not mention the details. We are not on details. We are on an emergency call of the whole system, and not just ask the governments to make fine-tuning. We have, therefore, you should delete this mention of details, I think.
I think, excuse me.
I mean, if I could just introduce one word, I think immediacy is the issue. I mean, coming from Australia where none of these issues are immediate at all, I think the word is immediate, and I pick up on Mr. Ackerman's point that you need, if perceptions move away from you, you'll never recover. So it's immediate in terms of the points that Mr. Ackerman was making.
Right, Laurent, so you see you get support, so now you need to organize a plenary session, right?
I think the message must be very simple. And I think also that the message shouldn't be addressed to a specific government. It's a message addressed to the leaders who are attending the G20 tomorrow. So I take what you said, but I would say the B20 in Cannes summit express its support to the plan announced by the Eurozone governments last Thursday and encourage the governments to move towards successful implementation of the plan. Maybe we should add to move diligently towards successful implementation of the plan.
I heard quickly or something about
Or
speed,
quickly.
in terms of the conversation. Okay.
And that's it.
And don't you want, sorry.
Yeah, urge. Yeah, good idea.
And perhaps in terms of conclusion or proposal, don't you want to convey the message that you pronounce, which according to me is fundamental, which is we need to go towards more integration, because what we have said is that there is not many solutions. Either we go towards more integration or...
Yes, Christian, but if I may, I think the representatives of European countries may talk about integration. And the European Business Confederation almost all agree. But here we are the B20. We are not only Europeans. So I think we shouldn't express on behalf of other countries on that issue.
I would like to, we still have a couple of minutes. There's one let's say, nation that is quiet and in the backseat of all these discussions. And I would like to give Peter Sands an opportunity to give us a little bit of a feedback of how we deal with this whole thing in the UK, besides, there's some of the public stances that we've seen last week.
Well, I'm not sure I'm in a very good position to talk for the UK, because although we're a UK bank, we don't do much business in the UK.
Gives you so much.
I think the UK, if I was to sort of give you my personal perspective on what the UK stance is, of the elements of the package, the UK is actually supportive of what is proposed. It's not supportive of the financial transaction tax, but it is supportive of the package for Greece, the PSI, the EFSF. The only issue I have, and I think the notion of this statement is a sensible one, but I don't think we should kid ourselves. There are a lot of people outside Europe, and I'm afraid I would number myself among them, who are pretty skeptical about whether this plan is going to work. That doesn't mean that I'm against encouraging them to do it, because I think the alternatives are worse. But I still think we shouldn't kid ourselves that there's a lot of people out there, and particularly if we are encouraging B20 participants as a whole to stand behind it, I think we just need to think quite carefully about the wording, in the sense that it shouldn't be implying that everybody else is completely confident that this is going to work. So I just think we should just tone the wording quite carefully on that perspective.
Great. Thank you very much. I always like that when topics are becoming more dynamic. You turn from one. Oh, please, Patrick.
Just one question. Shouldn't we say well-structured plan? Because, to stop the Pandora's box syndrome, we maybe there will be other measures that will be needed. So maybe the statement should be a bit broader. And I was asking myself also if we shouldn't say, in the interest of economic stability and public good in general, because in fact we are a business community, but we also work in the interest, because we are on the verge of maybe something dramatic for the people.
If I could just build on, I think if we use language like that we urge the leaders to build on the plan announced last Thursday, with a well-structured package of measures, and move swiftly to implementation, that I think picks up on sort of Patrick's point, and also I think addresses the concern that many of us would have, is actually there's a hell of a lot of work to actually make this thing more coherent, because it's got some bits in it that don't really add up, and things like the funding side of it. There could either be a very good solution to the funding, or there actually could be solutions to the funding bit that don't work at all.
Laurence, but we'll leave that to you now to figure that out. I would like to thank again my colleagues for the considerable work that has gone into this working group. Thanks for the contributions now from Joe, Robson, and the spontaneous reactions from you, Gabriele. And let's all hope for the best. Thanks.